The blizzard descended on the Sierra Nevada foothills with such ferocity that even seasoned travelers knew better than to venture out. But Everett Thorne had no choice because his cattle wouldn't survive another night without feed, and he'd be damned if he lost his entire herd to this January storm that had swept down from the mountains with barely a warning. It was 1884, and winter had come to California with an unusual vengeance, temperatures plunging far below what the region typically experienced, transforming the landscape into something foreign and hostile. Everett pulled his collar tighter against the wind that sliced through layers of wool and leather like they were nothing more than paper. His ranch sat 5 miles outside Stockton, California, far enough from town that he might as well have been on another planet when weather like this rolled in. The snow had started 3 days ago, soft and almost pretty at first, then building into something monstrous that threatened everything he'd worked for since settling here 6 years back. At 28 years old, he'd carved out a decent life for himself, managing his spread with nothing but hard work and determination. But nature had a way of humbling even the most prepared man. He'd just finished breaking through the ice on the water trough when he saw something dark against the white landscape, a shape that didn't belong to any fence post or boulder he knew. Everett squinted through the driving snow, his heart picking up pace as the shape seemed to shift, then collapse. Without thinking, he abandoned his tools and started running, his boots punching through the knee-deep drifts with each labored step. What he found made his blood run cold despite the exertion warming his muscles. A woman lay face down in the snow, her dress torn and inadequate for weather like this, her dark hair splayed around her head like a fan. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes and lips, and when Everett dropped to his knees beside her, he couldn't tell if she was breathing. Madam, can you hear me?" His voice came out rough, urgent, no response. He pressed 2 fingers against her throat, searching for a pulse, and relief flooded through him when he felt the faint, thready beat beneath her frozen skin. She was alive, but barely. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and when he carefully turned her over, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 22 or 23, with delicate features now pale as the snow surrounding them. Everett didn't waste time wondering how she'd ended up here or where she'd come from. Questions could wait. Right now, she had minutes, not hours. He scooped her into his arms, startled by how light she felt, and began the difficult trek back to his cabin. The wind fought him every step, trying to steal his balance and his breath. But he'd grown up in Montana before coming to California, and he knew how to move through weather that wanted you dead. His cabin appeared through the white curtain, like a blessing, small but solid, with smoke still rising from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before heading out, thank God, because she needed warmth immediately. Everett kicked the door open and carried her inside, snow following them in a swirl of white before he managed to shoulder the door closed again. The relative warmth of the cabin hit him like a wall, making his exposed skin tingle painfully as blood flow returned to normal. The woman in his arms didn't react at all, her head lolling against his shoulder, and that terrified him more than anything. He'd seen men freeze to death in Montana, knew the stages, understood that she was dancing right on the edge of the point where the cold became permanent. His medical supplies were limited to what any rancher kept on hand, bandages and whiskey and a few other basics, nothing that would help with hypothermia this severe. Everett laid her on the floor near the fireplace and began stoking the flames, adding wood until the fire roared to life, heat radiating into the small space. But he knew from experience that warming someone too quickly could kill them, just as surely as the cold itself. The transition had to be gradual, controlled. He grabbed every blanket he owned from the chest at the foot of his bed and spread them on the floor closer to the fire, then carefully moved her onto them. Her dress was soaked through, frozen in places, and he knew it had to come off. Everett had been raised with strict notions of propriety, but propriety wouldn't save her life. He worked quickly and clinically, removing the sodden fabric and replacing it with dry, long underwear from his own supplies, averting his eyes as much as possible while still making sure he got her into the warm, dry clothing. Even wrapped in 3 blankets with the fire blazing, she continued to shiver violently, her whole body convulsing with the effort to generate heat. Her teeth chattered so hard, he worried she might crack them. Everett remembered his father's words from years ago, spoken after they had pulled a neighbor from an icy river. Sometimes the only thing that saves them is your own warmth, body to body, sharing what you've got. He'd been 14 then, and the idea had seemed strange, uncomfortable. Now, at 28 and watching this woman die despite the fire and blankets, he understood. Everett stripped down to his own long underwear, then carefully slipped beneath the blankets beside her, pulling her cold body against his chest and wrapping his arms around her. She was like holding a block of ice, so cold it almost hurt. But he held on, tucking her head under his chin and rubbing her back in slow, steady motions. "Come on," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "You're safe now. Just hold on." Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Everett kept the fire fed with his free arm, adding logs when the flames began to die down, never releasing his hold on the woman whose name he didn't even know. Gradually, so gradually he almost didn't notice at first, her skin began to warm. The violent shivering eased into something gentler, then occasional tremors, then finally stopped altogether. Her breathing, which had been shallow and irregular, deepened into something more natural. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world, wind howling around the cabin's corners and snow piling against the walls, but inside, wrapped in blankets and warmed by fire and human contact, life was slowly winning its battle against death. As the 3rd hour approached, the woman stirred. A small sound escaped her throat, something between a whimper and a sigh, and Everett felt her fingers twitch against his chest, where her hand had come to rest. He looked down and found her eyes fluttering open, confusion and fear immediately filling their brown depths as she tried to make sense of where she was and who was holding her. "Easy," Everett said softly, loosening his grip but not releasing her entirely. "You're safe. I found you in the snow, brought you here. You were freezing to death." She stared at him for a long moment, taking in his face, the cabin around them, the intimate position they were in. He could see the moment awareness fully returned, could practically watch her mind working to piece together her situation. To his surprise, instead of panic or outrage at finding herself in a strange man's arms, her eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was dead," she whispered, her voice hoarse and raw. "I couldn't feel anything anymore. I just wanted to sleep." "I know, but you're alive, and you're going to stay that way." Everett carefully extracted himself from the blankets, immediately feeling the loss of her warmth against him, which was strange considering he'd been the one providing the heat. He grabbed a shirt and pulled it on, giving her some privacy to collect herself. "Can you tell me your name?" "Sophia," she said, struggling to sit up. Everett helped her, propping her against the side of his bed frame, keeping the blankets wrapped securely around her. "Sophia Ashford. Everett Thorne. This is my ranch, about 5 miles outside Stockton. What were you doing out in that storm, Miss Ashford?" Pain flashed across her face, and she looked away toward the fire. "Running. I was running from something terrible, and I didn't realize how bad the weather had gotten until it was too late. I tried to find shelter, but everything looked the same, all white and endless. I kept thinking I'd see a building or a town, but there was nothing." Everett moved to his small kitchen area and began heating water for coffee, figuring she could use something warm inside her. "You must have come from the east, heading toward Stockton. There's nothing but open range between here and the foothills, no shelter for miles. You're lucky I was out checking my cattle." "Lucky," Sophia repeated, testing the word like it was foreign. "I suppose I am, though it doesn't feel like luck is something I've had much of lately." He didn't press her for details, sensing she'd share when she was ready. Instead, he focused on practical matters, pouring coffee when it was ready and handing her a tin cup, then retrieving some bread and cold meat from his larder. She took the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the cup and breathing in the steam before taking a careful sip. "Thank you," she said after a moment, "for saving my life, for not leaving me out there." "Couldn't have lived with myself if I had," Everett replied simply. He settled into his only chair, leaving her the more comfortable position against the bed. "You planning to tell me what you were running from, or is that your business alone?" Sophia was quiet for so long, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My husband. Though I suppose he's not really my husband anymore, considering he left me for dead." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Everett felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and immediate. "He what?" "We were traveling from Sacramento to Stockton," Sophia explained, her hands trembling slightly around the coffee cup. "We'd been married 3 months. I thought I knew him. Thought he was a good man. But money does things to people, changes them. He'd gotten word of some investment opportunity in Stockton, said it would make us rich. But somewhere along the road, he decided he'd rather have my dowry and his freedom than a wife. She took another sip of coffee, clearly trying to steady herself. We made camp 2 nights ago, before the snow really started. I woke up in the middle of the night, and he was gone. Took the horses, the wagon, everything we had, left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a note saying he was sorry, but he never really loved me, that the marriage was a mistake. I tried to follow the road, but the snow covered everything, and I got turned around. Everett's jaw clenched. He'd known some worthless men in his time, but abandoning a woman in winter weather was lower than low. You know his name? Where he might be headed? Marcus Green, and if I had to guess, he's probably nowhere near Stockton now. Likely took my money and headed for San Francisco, or maybe south toward Los Angeles. Smart enough not to go where he said he was going. Sophia's voice carried a bitter edge. I should have seen the signs. My father tried to warn me, said Marcus was too smooth, too charming. But I was 22 and thought I knew everything, thought I was in love. Your father, he in Sacramento? Was. He passed last year. That's when Marcus started courting me, right after the funeral. Now I understand why. He heard about the inheritance, the money my father left me, and saw an opportunity. She looked down at the coffee, shame coloring her features. I'm such a fool. You trusted someone. That doesn't make you a fool. It makes him a criminal. Everett stood and checked the fire again, his mind working through the situation. Storm like this, it'll be at least 2 more days before the roads are passable. You'll stay here until it's safe to travel. I'll take you into Stockton then, help you figure out your next steps. Sophia looked up at him, surprise evident in her expression. You'd do that? Even though I'm a married woman? Even though it could cause talk? Far as I'm concerned, a man who leaves his wife to freeze isn't a husband at all. And I don't much care about talk. Right is right, and leaving you stranded isn't right. He pulled a clean shirt from his trunk and handed it to her. This'll be more comfortable than those long johns once you're warm through. There's a privacy screen in the corner. I'll turn my back. As he busied himself with preparing a simple meal, Everett could hear the rustle of fabric behind him as Sophia changed. He found himself thinking about the feel of her in his arms, the way she'd fit against him like she belonged there, and had to shake his head to clear the thoughts. She was married, in trouble, and vulnerable. The last thing she needed was him developing inappropriate feelings. But when she emerged from behind the screen, swimming in his shirt that fell to her knees, her dark hair loose around her shoulders and her color finally returned to normal, something shifted in his chest. She was beautiful. There was no denying that, but it was more than physical attractiveness. There was strength in the set of her shoulders, despite everything she'd been through, intelligence in her eyes, and a vulnerability that made him want to protect her from every harm the world might throw her way. Smells good, Sophia said, moving closer to where he was frying salt pork and eggs. Can I help? You can sit and rest. You nearly died a few hours ago. And you saved me. The least I can do is help with supper. She picked up a knife and started slicing the bread without waiting for permission, and Everett found himself fighting a smile. Stubborn. He'd always liked stubborn. They worked in companionable silence, preparing the simple meal together, and when they sat down to eat, the cabin that had always felt adequately sized for one suddenly seemed intimate with 2. Outside, the wind continued to rage, but inside, there was warmth and food and unexpected company. Tell me about your ranch, Sophia said as they ate. How long have you been here? 6 years this spring. Came down from Montana with enough money saved for 50 head of cattle and a patch of land. Built this cabin myself, spent the first winter sleeping under a lean-to while I got the walls up. Everett gestured around the small space. It's not much, but it's mine, free and clear. Herd's grown to near 300 now. Another few years, and I'll have enough to build a proper house, maybe hire some help. You do all the work yourself? Most of it. Got a neighbor about 7 miles west who helps during branding season, and I return the favor. Otherwise, it's just me and the cattle and whatever weather California decides to throw at us. He paused, considering. Usually that means drought, not blizzards. This is unusual. Sophia nodded slowly. I grew up in Sacramento, but my father had business interests in ranching. I know enough to understand how hard the work is, especially alone. You must be very dedicated. Or very stubborn. Probably both. Everett finished his meal and carried his plate to the wash basin. You can have the bed tonight. I'll make a place by the fire. I can't take your bed. You've already done so much. You're taking the bed, Miss Ashford. I won't hear otherwise. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it, recognizing the finality in his tone. Thank you. And please, call me Sophia. I think we're past formalities, considering. Considering he'd held her nearly naked body against his for 3 hours while saving her life. Yes, they were definitely past formalities. Sophia, he agreed, and I'm Everett. As darkness fell outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up. Everett banked the fire to last through the night and made himself a pallet of blankets on the floor, insisting Sophia take the bed despite her continued protests. She finally relented, climbing beneath the quilts his mother had made for him before he left Montana, and he tried not to notice how right she looked there, her dark hair spread across his pillow. Everett, her voice came soft through the darkness, just barely audible over the wind outside. Yes? Why did you really help me? You could have left me out there, pretended you never saw me. No one would have known. He was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. My pa used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching, but what he does when no one is. I'd like to think I'm the kind of man who helps when help is needed. Simple as that. It's not simple, Sophia whispered. Most men wouldn't have bothered. Most men wouldn't have risked themselves or their reputation. You're a good man, Everett Thorne. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just listened to her breathing gradually slow and deepen as sleep claimed her. But he lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what tomorrow would bring, wondering how he was supposed to let her go when the storm ended and knowing he had no choice. She was married, running from a bad situation, but still legally bound, and he had no right to the feelings already taking root in his chest. The second day dawned gray and cold, snow still falling, but with less fury than before. Sophia woke to find Everett already up, the cabin warm and coffee made, his coat on, as he prepared to head out to his cattle again. She sat up quickly, pushing hair from her face. You're going out in that? Cattle don't feed themselves. I won't be long, hour at most. There's food in the larder if you're hungry. Make yourself at home. He pulled his hat low over his eyes. Bar the door behind me, just to be safe. Don't open it for anyone but me. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Sophia climbed from the bed and did as he'd instructed, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. Then she stood in the center of the cabin, looking around at this space that belonged to a man she'd known less than 24 hours, but who had already shown her more kindness than her husband had in 3 months of marriage. The cabin was sparse but clean, everything in its place with the precision of someone accustomed to living alone. A small kitchen area with an iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, the bed she'd slept in, a chest that likely held his clothes, and shelves lined with supplies and a few books. Sophia moved closer to examine the titles: Shakespeare, some agricultural texts, a worn Bible, and, interestingly, a collection of poetry by Tennyson. Not what she would have expected from a rough rancher. She made herself useful, tidying the cabin and preparing a proper breakfast with the supplies she found. By the time Everett returned, stamping snow from his boots and shaking ice from his coat, she had eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits waiting. You didn't have to do this, he said, but his eyes lit up at the sight of hot food. I wanted to. I need to feel useful, need to do something besides sit and think about what a mess I've made of my life. Sophia poured coffee for both of them. Besides, you saved my life. The least I can do is cook breakfast. They ate together, conversation flowing more easily than it had the night before. Sophia asked about Montana and his life before California. Everett shared stories of growing up on his father's ranch, learning to ride before he could walk, helping with cattle drives as a teenager. In turn, she told him about Sacramento, about growing up as the daughter of a successful merchant, about her mother, who died when she was young, and how her father had raised her with perhaps more freedom than was considered proper for a young lady. He let me help with his business, Sophia explained. Taught me numbers and how to read contracts, how to spot a cheat, and when to walk away from a bad deal. I loved it, being useful, being part of something. Then he died, and suddenly I was supposed to be just a woman, just someone's wife, and I hated it. Marcus promised we'd be partners, that he'd let me be involved in his business ventures. Another lie. Everett leaned back in his chair, studying her. What would you do if you could do anything? If you weren't married, weren't running, had the freedom to choose. I'd run a business, maybe a hotel or a restaurant, something where I could use my mind and my skills. Or I'd buy land and raise horses. I've always loved horses, she smiled sadly. Foolish dreams for a woman, I suppose. Don't see why. Known plenty of women who ran businesses, especially out west. Takes intelligence and hard work, both of which you seem to have in abundance. He stood and began clearing the dishes. Storm's letting up. If it stops completely, roads should be clear enough to travel by tomorrow morning. The reminder that their time together was temporary fell between them like a stone. Sophia felt something twist in her chest, a reluctance to leave this warm cabin and the man who'd shown her what true decency looked like. But she had no claim on him, no right to stay beyond the immediate danger passing. I'll need to figure out what to do once we reach Stockton, she said quietly. I have no money, no belongings. Marcus took everything. We'll sort it out. There's a sheriff in town, might be worth reporting what happened. And there's a boarding house run by a widow named Martha Jensen. Good woman, might have work available if you need it. Everett paused at the wash basin, his back to her. Or you could stay here. The words hung in the air, shocking in their implications. Sophia stood slowly, moving closer to him. Stay here? Everett, I can't. People would talk. Your reputation would be ruined. Let them talk. I've got a spare room I could section off in the cabin, make it proper. You could help with the ranch work, the cooking and such. I'd pay you fair wages, same as I'd pay any hired help. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I'm not suggesting anything improper, Sophia, but you need a safe place and I could use the help. Seems like it might work for both of us. It was a generous offer, perhaps too generous, and Sophia felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me. I could be lying about everything. You're not lying. I can see the truth in your eyes, in the way you flinch when you talk about your husband. And I'm being kind because it's the right thing to do, and because... He stopped, seeming to think better of whatever he'd been about to say. Because everyone deserves a second chance. What he'd almost said hung between them, unspoken but palpable. Sophia felt it too, this connection that had formed impossibly fast, born in the crucible of near death and rescue. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt safer with him than she'd ever felt with Marcus, more seen and understood than she'd been in months. I need to be practical, she said finally. I'm legally married. If Marcus ever came back, if anyone found out I was staying here with you, unmarried and unchaperoned, it could cause serious problems for both of us. Then we'll go to town tomorrow and talk to the sheriff, see about getting your marriage annulled. If your husband abandoned you and took your property, that's grounds enough in most courts. Everett's voice was firm, decided. Either way, you're not going back to him, not if I have anything to say about it. The fierceness in his tone sent warmth through Sophia's chest. No one had ever defended her like this, had ever stood up for her with such certainty. You barely know me, she whispered. I know enough. I know you're strong and smart, and you deserve better than what you got. The rest, well, we've got time to learn if you're willing. If she was willing. Sophia looked at this man who'd saved her life, who'd held her through the coldest night, who'd given her warmth and shelter and hope when she'd thought she had none left. She thought about the alternative, going into Stockton alone with nothing, trying to rebuild a life from ashes. Then she thought about staying here, helping build something with a man who seemed to see her as an equal rather than a burden. I'm willing, she said, and watched Everett's face transform with a smile that made something flutter in her stomach. But we do this properly. We talk to the sheriff, we make sure everything is legal and above board. I won't ruin your reputation or give anyone cause to question your character. Agreed. Tomorrow morning, soon as we can travel, we head to Stockton. Everett extended his hand, formal, despite everything they had already shared. Partners? Sophia took his hand, feeling calluses and strength and unexpected gentleness in his grip. Partners. The rest of the day passed in comfortable companionship. The snow finally stopped in the early afternoon, leaving the world outside blanketed in white, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Everett taught Sophia how to properly stack wood for the fire and showed her where he kept his supplies, practical information she'd need if she was serious about staying. She shared her knowledge of bookkeeping, showing him a better system for tracking his cattle sales and expenses. As evening approached, they made dinner together again, moving around the small kitchen with increasing ease. Sophia found herself acutely aware of every time their hands brushed, every moment when Everett stood close enough for her to feel his warmth. This pull she felt toward him was dangerous, inappropriate given her circumstances, but impossible to ignore. After dinner, as they sat by the fire, Everett reading, while Sophia mended a tear in one of his shirts she'd found, she broke the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Why haven't you married? You're, 27, 28? Most men your age are settled with families by now." Everett was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. 28. And I suppose I've been waiting for the right person. My parents had something special, real partnership, built on respect and love. My mother was my father's equal in every way that mattered. They worked the ranch together, made decisions together, faced hardships together. When she died, 5 years before I left Montana, part of him died too. I saw what that kind of love looked like, and I decided I wouldn't settle for anything less. "That's beautiful," Sophia said softly, "and rare. Most marriages I've seen are arrangements, convenience or economics with little actual feeling involved. Is that what yours was, with Marcus?" She thought about it, really examined her feelings for the first time since Marcus had left. "I thought I loved him. He was charming and attentive, said all the right things. But looking back, I think I was lonely after my father died. I wanted someone to need me, to build a life with. Marcus recognized that and used it. Whatever I felt, it wasn't real love. It was loneliness and grief and desperation dressed up as romance. Real love is patient," Everett said, his eyes on the fire. "It's choosing someone every day, not just in the beginning, when everything is exciting and new. It's working through problems together, instead of running when things get hard. My father always said that love was a verb, something you do, not just something you feel." Sophia set down her mending, looking at this thoughtful cowboy who seemed to understand things about love that her educated, refined husband never had. "You're not what I expected when I pictured a rancher." "What did you expect? Someone rougher, I suppose, less thoughtful. Not someone who reads Tennyson and talks about love as a verb." She smiled. "Not someone who would hold a freezing stranger for hours to save her life." Everett's eyes met hers across the fire, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You're not a stranger anymore, Sophia." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid, and Sophia felt balanced on a precipice. Part of her wanted to cross the small space between them, to close the distance and see what might happen. But the practical part, the part that had learned hard lessons from Marcus, held her back. "I should sleep," she said finally, standing and putting physical distance between them. "Tomorrow will be a long day." If Everett was disappointed, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and stood as well, preparing his pallet by the fire. "Sleep well, Sophia." But sleep was a long time coming for both of them, each lying in the darkness and thinking about the other, wondering what tomorrow would bring and whether the connection forming between them could possibly be real after such a short time. Morning arrived clear and brutally cold, the sun glinting off snow that had drifted in places to several feet deep. Everett rose before dawn, checking his cattle and preparing his horse for the journey into town. Sophia dressed in her own clothes, now cleaned and dried, though she kept Everett's shirt underneath for extra warmth. The ride to Stockton took 3 hours, the horse moving slowly through deep snow, while Sophia sat in front of Everett in the saddle, his arms around her holding the reins. It was intimate and necessary, sharing body heat in the freezing temperatures. But Sophia was hyper-aware of every place their bodies touched, every breath Everett took that stirred the hair at her temple. They didn't talk much during the journey, both conserving energy and warmth. But the silence was comfortable. Sophia found herself leaning back against Everett's chest, letting his solid presence support her, and felt safer than she had any right to feel, given how uncertain her future remained. Stockton appeared gradually through the white landscape, a sprawling town that had grown rapidly during the gold rush years and remained an important agricultural center. Even in January, with snow covering everything, the streets showed signs of life. Smoke rose from chimneys, and a few hardy souls moved between buildings, bundled against the cold. Everett guided his horse to the sheriff's office, a squat building near the center of town. He dismounted first, then helped Sophia down, his hands steady at her waist. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." Sophia squared her shoulders and followed him inside. The sheriff was a man in his 50s with gray streaking his hair and sharp eyes that took in every detail. He introduced himself as Sheriff Thomas Crawford and listened intently as Sophia recounted her story. Everett stood beside her the entire time, a solid presence that gave her courage to share the humiliating details of how thoroughly Marcus had deceived her. When she finished, Sheriff Crawford leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Marcus Green, you said? Interesting. We had a man by that name pass through here 4 days ago, just before the storm hit. Bought a ticket on the southbound stage, said he was heading for Los Angeles. Tried to sell a wagon and team of horses too, but our livery owner got suspicious about the paperwork and refused the sale. Man left in a hurry after that." Hope flickered in Sophia's chest. "The wagon and horses, do you know where they are? If they're the ones I'm thinking of, livery owner impounded them pending investigation. If you can prove they're yours, you might be able to get them back." The sheriff pulled out a ledger and made some notes. "As for your husband, I'll send telegrams to sheriffs in towns along the stage route, see if we can track him down. What he did constitutes abandonment and theft. We find him, he'll face charges." "What about the marriage?" Everett asked. "Is there a way to dissolve it given the circumstances?" Sheriff Crawford nodded slowly. "California law allows for divorce on grounds of abandonment. You'll need to file a petition with the court, and there'll be a waiting period, but given that your husband left you to die in a blizzard and stole your property, I'd say you've got solid grounds. I can point you toward a lawyer who handles such matters. Widow named Ellen Porter, knows the law better than most men and charges fair rates." Relief washed through Sophia so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. Everett's hand found the small of her back, steadying her, and she flashed him a grateful look. "Thank you, Sheriff. I can't tell you what this means." "Just doing my job, madam. One more thing, though." The sheriff's gaze moved between Sophia and Everett, assessing. "Where are you planning to stay while this gets sorted out? Could be weeks before everything is finalized." "She'll be staying at my ranch," Everett said firmly. "As my employee. I need help with the household work, and Miss Ashford needs a safe place and honest work, all proper and above board." The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "I'll make note of that in my report. Might help with the divorce proceedings, showing you've got respectable employment and a place to stay. But people will talk, Thorne. You prepared for that?" "Let them talk. I've never much cared for gossip, and I won't start now." They left the sheriff's office with directions to both the lawyer and the livery. The wagon and horses were indeed Sophia's, and the livery owner was relieved to turn them over to their rightful owner. Seeing her belongings again, the few possessions Marcus hadn't managed to sell or abandon, brought tears to Sophia's eyes. Her mother's jewelry box, her father's pocket watch, a few dresses and books. Not much, but enough to prove she wasn't starting completely from nothing. The meeting with Ellen Porter, the lawyer, went smoothly. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to Sophia's story with evident anger and assured her that the divorce petition would be filed immediately. "Cases like yours, where abandonment is clear and there's criminal activity involved, tend to move faster through the courts," Ellen explained. "I'd estimate 3 to 4 months before everything is finalized, assuming your husband doesn't contest, which seems unlikely given he's currently fleeing prosecution." 3 to 4 months. It seemed like forever and no time at all. Sophia thanked her and paid the initial fee from the small amount of money she found hidden in her belongings. Money Marcus had apparently missed in his haste to leave. By the time they finished their business in town, afternoon was giving way to evening. Everett loaded Sophia's belongings into the wagon, hitched it to the horses, and they began the journey back to the ranch. Sophia drove the wagon while Everett rode alongside on his horse. And despite the cold and the uncertain future, she felt lighter than she had in months. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sophia took over the cooking and household management, and true to his word, Everett partitioned off a section of the cabin to give her a private space. It wasn't much, just a corner sectioned with hanging blankets, but it was hers, and that mattered. In exchange for room and board, she helped with ranch work where she could, learning to feed cattle and check fences, and keeping detailed records of all expenses and income. They worked well together, discovering quickly that their skills complemented each other. Everett taught Sophia about ranching, patiently explaining the intricacies of cattle management and land stewardship. She helped him organize his business affairs, pointing out inefficiencies in his systems and suggesting improvements that saved both time and money. Their evening conversations ranged from practical discussions about the ranch to deeper topics, philosophy and dreams, and the nature of happiness. What surprised Sophia most was how natural it all felt. She'd expected awkwardness, especially given the intimacy of how they'd met. But instead, there was ease. They moved around each other in the small cabin with growing familiarity, learned each other's habits and preferences. Everett liked his coffee strong and his eggs scrambled. Sophia preferred to rise early and watch the sunrise. He was quiet in the mornings until he'd had at least one cup of coffee. She hummed while she cooked, unconscious melodies that made him smile. And slowly, carefully, they were falling in love. It happened in small moments, the way Everett brought her wildflowers that poked through the melting snow in late February, sheepish about the gesture, but pleased when her face lit up. How Sophia learned to make his favorite pie, experimenting until she got the crust just right, and the expression of pure joy when he took the first bite. The night she woke from a nightmare about freezing to death and found Everett at her curtain, asking if she was all right, and how safe she felt when he sat outside her space talking quietly until she could sleep again. By March, when the snow had melted and the first hints of spring appeared, they had developed a routine that felt less like employer and employee and more like partners. They still maintained propriety, Sophia in her section space and Everett in his bed, but the attraction between them was undeniable and growing stronger daily. One evening in early April, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sophia finally acknowledged what had been building between them. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Everett turned to look at her, his expression open and patient. "I'm listening." "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, terrifying and liberating in equal measure. "I know it's too soon, and my divorce isn't finalized, and there are 100 reasons why this is complicated, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. You're the best man I've ever known, Everett Thorne, and being here with you, building this life together, even temporarily, it's shown me what I actually want, what real partnership looks like." For a long moment, Everett didn't respond, and Sophia felt her heart sink. She'd miscalculated, had projected her own feelings onto him, had ruined everything with her impulsive honesty. But then he reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers with a gentleness that made her throat tight. "I've been in love with you since about the second week," he admitted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tried to talk myself out of it, told myself it was too fast and you were married and vulnerable. But, Sophia, you're the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing I think about before sleep. You make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place I live. You make everything better just by being here." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks, but they were happy tears, relieved tears. "What do we do? The divorce won't be final for another few months." "We wait," Everett said simply. "We keep doing what we're doing, building this partnership, learning each other. And when the divorce is final and you're truly free, if you still want me, I'll marry you proper. I'll build you the house I've been planning, give you the life you deserve, be the partner you should have had from the start. I'll still want you," Sophia said with absolute certainty. 3 months or 3 years from now, that won't change. Everett pulled her closer, and Sophia went willingly, tucking herself against his side as they watched the sun disappear below the horizon. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, chaste and sweet and full of promise. "Then we'll wait together." The following months were sweet torture, love acknowledged, but physical expressions limited by propriety and circumstances. They held hands during evening walks. Everett would kiss Sophia's forehead or cheek in moments of affection. She learned the feel of his embrace, warm and secure, during the times when emotions overwhelmed her. But they waited, both understanding that doing things right mattered, that building their relationship on a foundation of respect and patience would make everything that followed stronger. News came in May that Marcus had been arrested in Los Angeles trying to board a ship for South America. The money from Sophia's dowry was recovered, though he'd spent a portion of it. The sheriff informed them that Marcus would face trial for theft and abandonment, and that he'd signed papers agreeing not to contest the divorce in exchange for a lighter sentence. Ellen Porter assured Sophia that the final decree would be issued by mid-June. As that date approached, Everett began building the addition to the cabin he'd promised. Sophia helped where she could, holding boards and passing tools, watching the structure take shape and feeling hope build in her chest. This would be their home, not just his or hers, but theirs together. A place they'd create as partners, equals in every way that mattered. The divorce decree arrived on June 15th, officially dissolving Sophia's marriage to Marcus Green and restoring her legal independence. That evening, Everett asked her to marry him properly, dropping to one knee in front of the half-finished edition and offering her a simple gold band he'd commissioned from Stockton's jeweler. "I know we've already talked about this," he said, looking up at her with love clear in his eyes. "But I want to do it right. Sophia Ashford, you are the strongest, smartest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. You make me want to be better, to build something worthy of you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sophia said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him for the first time, really kissing him. 3 months of restrained affection finally finding release. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married in Stockton 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony at the church with Sheriff Crawford and Ellen Porter as witnesses. Sophia wore a new dress she'd sewn herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar, and carried wildflowers Everett had picked that morning. He wore his best suit, slightly worn at the elbows but clean and pressed, and looked at her like she hung the moon. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and gave Everett permission to kiss his bride, Sophia felt everything click into place. This was what marriage should be, partnership built on mutual respect and genuine love, 2 people choosing each other freely and completely. Their wedding night was spent in the finished edition, a proper bedroom with windows facing east to catch the sunrise Sophia loved. Everett was gentle and patient, treating her like something precious, and when they finally came together, it felt like the natural conclusion to everything that had built between them since that frozen night in January. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Sophia traced patterns on his skin and marveled at how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been married to a man who saw her as a means to an end, slowly dying inside even before he left her to freeze. Now she was married to a man who valued her mind and her spirit as much as her body, who was building a life with her instead of using her to fund his own. "What are you thinking?" Everett asked, his voice rumbling under her ear. "That I almost died in that blizzard, and it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Is that terrible?" "Not terrible, just honest." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "I think about that night all the time, how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. How different everything would be if I'd gone out an hour later or taken a different path. But you didn't. You found me exactly when you were supposed to, and you saved me in more ways than you probably realize." Sophia propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "You showed me what real love looks like, Everett, what real partnership is. You gave me a second chance at life and happiness." "We gave each other that," he corrected, pulling her down for another kiss. "I was existing before you came, just working and surviving. You made me remember what it means to truly live, to build something with someone. You're my partner in every sense of the word, Sophia Thorne, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving worthy of you." "You already are," she whispered, settling back against him. "You already are." The years that followed were full of work and joy in equal measure. The ranch grew steadily under their joint management, Sophia's business acumen combined with Everett's ranching knowledge, creating something more successful than either could have built alone. They hired help as needed, treating workers fairly, and building a reputation as good employers. The house expanded room by room as their prosperity grew. Their first child, a son they named William after Everett's father, arrived in the spring of 1886. Sophia labored through the night with a midwife from town, while Everett paced outside, terrified and excited in equal measure. When he finally got to hold his son, tears streaming down his weathered face, Sophia knew she'd given him a gift as precious as the one he'd given her that frozen night. 2 years later, a daughter named Catherine after Sophia's mother joined their family, then another son, James, in 1891. The house filled with noise and laughter, with the controlled chaos of children growing up on a working ranch. Sophia and Everett raised them together, teaching them about hard work and kindness, about treating people fairly regardless of their station in life. On their 10th anniversary, Everett took Sophia to the spot where he'd found her all those years ago. It was summer now, the landscape green and alive, impossible to imagine under snow. They stood together looking at the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. "Sometimes I still dream about that night," Sophia admitted, her hand in Everett's. "But they're not nightmares anymore. In the dreams, I'm always warm, always safe, because you're there." "I'm always going to be there," Everett promised. "Through every storm and every season. That's what love is, Sophia. Being there, choosing each other, building something that lasts." They stood together as the sun set, their shadows long on the ground where she'd almost died, and Sophia thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Marcus had meant to destroy her when he abandoned her in that blizzard, had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and expected the cold to finish what his cruelty started. Instead, he'd inadvertently given her the greatest gift of her life by forcing her onto a path that led to Everett. She'd learned that love wasn't pretty words and charming gestures. It was action and choice and commitment. It was holding someone through the coldest night, sharing your warmth when you had little to spare. It was building a life together one day at a time, facing challenges as partners, celebrating victories as a team. Over the following years, the ranch continued to thrive. By 1895, the Thorne spread was one of the most respected operations in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealings. Sophia had become something of a local legend in her own right, a woman who ran the business side of a major ranch with skill that matched any man. She never forgot the lessons she'd learned from her father, and she made sure to pass them on to her children, teaching both sons and daughter about numbers and contracts and the importance of a handshake deal. William grew into a serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Catherine showed her mother's head for business, sharp and observant even as a child. James was the wild one, always getting into scrapes but loyal to his core. Watching them grow, seeing pieces of herself and Everett in each of them, filled Sophia with a contentment she'd never imagined possible. The hardships came too, as they always do. Years of drought that tested their resources and resolve. A bout of illness that swept through the region and took neighbors they'd considered friends. The inevitable challenges of raising children and maintaining a marriage through decades of daily life. But they faced everything together, Sophia and Everett, drawing strength from the partnership they'd forged. On their 20th anniversary, they held a celebration that brought together everyone from miles around. Friends, neighbors, ranch hands past and present. Even Sheriff Crawford, who was retired, but still sharp as ever. The house rang with music and laughter, their children weaving through the crowd, while Sophia and Everett stood together, accepting congratulations. 20 years, Everett mused later that evening, after everyone had gone and they stood on their porch watching stars emerge. Hard to believe it's been that long. "Feels like both forever and no time at all," Sophia said, leaning into his familiar warmth. Even after 2 decades, she never tired of the feeling of his arms around her, the solid strength of him that had saved her life and continued to anchor her every day since. Any regrets? Sophia thought about the question seriously as she did with everything Everett asked her. Not a single one. Well, except maybe that 3rd helping of pie I had at dinner. That might have been excessive. Everett's laugh rumbled through his chest, and Sophia felt it where she pressed against him. "I meant about us, about this life. I know what you meant, and no regrets. This life with you, building this ranch, raising our children, it's everything I never knew I wanted. You're everything I never knew I wanted." She turned to look up at him, this man whose face had become as familiar as her own, creased now with years, but still handsome, still hers. That night in the blizzard, when I was so cold I couldn't feel anything and thought I was dying, I remember thinking that at least it would be peaceful, that I'd just drift away and it would be over. I'd given up. Everett, I was ready to die. But you didn't. Because you wouldn't let me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, gave me your warmth when I had none, and then you gave me a reason to keep living. You showed me what real love looks like, and I've spent 20 years grateful for every single day. Everett pulled her closer, his cheek resting against her hair. You saved me too, you know. Before you, I was just surviving, working myself to exhaustion and telling myself it was enough. You taught me to actually live, to build something bigger than just a successful ranch. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose beyond just accumulating cattle and land. They stood together in the warm evening air, comfortable in the silence that only came from decades of knowing someone completely. Inside the house, they could hear their children settling for the night, William reading to his younger siblings like he often did. It was such an ordinary moment, peaceful and domestic, the kind of moment that made up a life. As more years passed, the Thorne Ranch became an institution in the region. People came from all over seeking Sophia's advice on business matters or Everett's expertise in ranching. They employed dozens of workers, treating everyone with the fairness and respect that had become their hallmark. Their children grew and eventually found loves of their own. William married a teacher from Sacramento and took over day-to-day management of the ranch. Catherine shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, following in Ellen Porter's footsteps. James joined the cavalry, seeking adventure beyond the family ranch. Through it all, Sophia and Everett remained each other's constant. They aged together gracefully, their hair going gray, their bodies bearing the marks of years of hard work. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened with time, tempered by shared experiences and tested by challenges overcome together. On their 30th anniversary in 1904, now grandparents several times over, they made a pilgrimage to the spot where Everett had found Sophia all those years ago. It had become a tradition, this annual visit to the place where their story began. Sophia moved slower now, her joints protesting more than they used to. But Everett was there to support her, as he always had been. 30 years, Sophia said, looking at the landscape that held such significance for them. Sometimes it seems impossible that I was ever that frightened girl freezing in the snow, that life feels like it belonged to someone else. You were never just a frightened girl. Even then, even dying, you had strength in you. I saw it the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin. Everett took her hand, his grip still strong despite the years. You survived because you're a survivor, Sophia. I just happened to be there to help. You did more than help. You gave me everything. She squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses that had been theirs since the first time they touched. A home, a family, a partnership that has made every day worth living. You kept your promise, Everett. You've been there through every storm. They stood together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land they had built their life on. In the distance, they could see their house, substantial and welcoming, smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Lights were beginning to appear in the windows as family gathered for the anniversary dinner Sophia's daughters-in-law had insisted on preparing. "We should head back," Everett said after a while. "Don't want to keep everyone waiting." But Sophia lingered a moment longer, committing the scene to memory. The way the fading light painted everything gold, the warmth of Everett's hand in hers, the sense of completion, of a life well lived and love well earned. She thought about that desperate, freezing night 3 decades ago, about the moment when she'd felt Everett's arms around her and known, even in her semi-conscious state, that she was safe. That moment had changed everything, had set her on a path she never could have imagined. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For being exactly where you needed to be on the coldest night of my life, for sharing your warmth, for building this beautiful life with me." Everett turned her to face him, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "The honor has been mine, Sophia Thorne. Every single day, the honor has been mine." They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and dedication. Then, hand in hand, they walked back toward their home where family waited, where warmth and laughter and the fruits of their shared labor filled every room. The years continued their inevitable march. Sophia and Everett settled more fully into the role of patriarch and matriarch, dispensing wisdom to children and grandchildren while slowly ceding control of the ranch to the next generation. They remained involved, of course, because work was in their blood, but they also learned to rest, to enjoy the peaceful moments they had earned through decades of hard labor. In 1909, as they approached their 35th anniversary, Everett fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia, his aging body unable to fight off the infection like it once could. Sophia never left his side, sitting vigil by their bed while the doctor came and went, and their children gathered in worried clusters throughout the house. "You can't leave me," Sophia whispered during one of Everett's more lucid moments, gripping his hand with both of hers. "Not yet. We have more years together, more anniversaries to celebrate." Everett's smile was weak but genuine. "I'm not going anywhere if I can help it. Still have too much to do, too many sunsets to watch with you." And whether through sheer stubbornness, Sophia's devoted care, or simple luck, Everett pulled through. The recovery was slow, taking months before he regained his full strength. But he survived. The experience left both of them shaken, but also grateful, a reminder that every day together was a gift not to be taken for granted. Their 35th anniversary celebration was quieter than previous years. Just immediate family gathered around the dinner table, but it felt more precious for its intimacy. William proposed a toast, raising his glass toward his parents with tears in his eyes. To the two strongest people I know, who taught us all what real love and real partnership looks like. To 35 years of marriage and a lifetime of devotion. May we all be so lucky. Hear, hear, Catherine added, her lawyer's voice carrying clearly. You two set an impossibly high standard, but we're all better for trying to meet it. Even James, home on leave from the cavalry and never one for sentimentality, looked emotional. Everything good in my life, I learned from watching you two. Thank you for showing us how it's done. Sophia looked around the table at the family she and Everett had created, at children now grown with children of their own, at the legacy they were leaving, and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was what mattered, not the size of the ranch or the money in the bank or any material measure of success. This, the love and respect of family, the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good, this was true wealth. The following years were gentler, peaceful in a way that felt earned after decades of hard work. Sophia and Everett spent more time simply being together, talking about everything and nothing, enjoying the quiet companionship of two people who'd spent a lifetime learning each other. They still made their annual pilgrimage to the spot where he'd found her, still marveled at the path that had brought them together. In 1914, on their 40th anniversary, the entire region seemed to celebrate with them. It was rare for a marriage to last so long, rarer still for the love to remain so evident after 4 decades. The house overflowed with well-wishers, and Sophia and Everett held court like the royalty they'd become in the community, accepting congratulations and dispensing advice to younger couples. That evening, after everyone had finally gone and they were alone, Sophia and Everett sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The summer air was warm and sweet, carrying the scent of the roses Sophia had planted years ago. She leaned against Everett's shoulder, his arm around her waist, and felt the profound contentment that came from a life fully lived. 40 years, Everett said softly. Never thought I'd be lucky enough for 40 years with someone like you. Someone like me? An almost frozen vagrant you found in the snow? Sophia's tone was teasing, the joke worn smooth by years of repetition. The love of my life, who I found on the coldest night, who I saved with nothing but warmth, and who saved me right back with everything she had. Everett's voice was serious now, emotional in the way he only allowed himself to be when they were alone. You're still the most remarkable person I've ever known, Sophia. Still make every day brighter just by being in it. Sophia felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that came easily now in her advancing age. We built something beautiful together, didn't we? Not just the ranch or the house, but this life, this family, this love. The most beautiful thing I've ever been part of, Everett agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first night together all those years ago. The same stars that had looked down on a frozen woman and the man who refused to let her die. Time had passed, seasons had changed, but the fundamental truth remained unchanged. They loved each other completely, chose each other daily, and had built a partnership that would outlast their own lives through the children and grandchildren who carried forward their legacy. As they finally rose to head inside, Sophia paused, looking back at the land spreading out from their porch. 40 years ago, this had been a modest ranch with a small cabin, worked by one determined man. Now it was a thriving operation, supporting multiple families, beautiful and prosperous in ways that seemed impossible. But the real transformation wasn't the land or the buildings. It was her, a woman who had been abandoned and left to freeze, who'd survived to build a life beyond her wildest dreams. Thank you, she said one more time to the man who'd made it all possible, the cowboy who'd shared his warmth on the coldest night and every day since. Everett simply pulled her close and kissed her forehead, the gesture as natural as breathing after 40 years. No words were needed. They'd said everything that mattered over 4 decades of partnership, spoken through actions more than words, through shared labor and mutual support and unwavering devotion. They walked inside together, closing the door on another day in a lifetime of days, secure in the knowledge that they'd found something rare and precious in each other. The story that began with a desperate rescue in a blizzard had become a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest futures, and that real love, the kind built on partnership and respect and daily choice, could weather any storm and last forever.